you, New Hampshire.
A socialist won in New Hampshire. How can this be? To me, socialism means less choice, less freedom, poverty, misery. The good news is that some young people who've lived under socialism now warn others what it's like.
With Bernie Sanders, it's like, if you guys elect that guy, it's going to be Chavez.
But somehow socialism is not a threat to many Americans. Capitalism is the dirty word.
You don't consider yourself a capitalist, though?
No, I don't.
Anybody else on the stage who's not a capitalist?
Capitalism versus socialism. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Bernie Sanders killed it in New Hampshire. Overwhelmingly, Democratic voters chose a man who calls himself a democratic socialist. Voters want that? I think they don't know what socialism means. Bernie says it means all kinds of good things like fairness, equality, kindness. His supporters say democratic socialism is what countries like Denmark have. And people there have comfortable lives without ruthless capitalism and competition. Boy, I'm starting to talk myself into this. But thinking this way is dumb. I liked what Regina Carson posted on my Facebook page. Socialism sounds so nice, being social. People don't understand it really means for the good of the group over the individual. Still, lots of Americans say, that would be good. Let's take care of the group, not just selfish, rich individuals. That's what Democracy for America, a million-member progressive group founded by Howard Dean, believes. They've endorsed Bernie Sanders, the first time they made a presidential endorsement ever. Neil Soroka speaks for the group. So you must be happy.
There's a lot to be excited about. You know, when someone who is aggressively speaking up for the fact that we all do better when we all do better to win in such a big way, I think that's a good thing for Democrats, and I think that's a good thing for the country.
Now, socialism generally means the government owns the means of production. Do you want that?
Well, I think there is some antiquated views about what socialism is. I don't think anyone's calling for, state ownership of the gas station down the street. But what we are saying is that the current system that we have right now isn't working. When over 40 million Americans are still living in poverty, at the same time that a millionaire and billionaire class is trying to essentially own all political discourse in this country, that's problematic, and that's what we have to work together to dismantle.
All right, well, let's take them one at a time. Own political discourse. You're referring to Citizens United allowing these companies, rich people to spend a lot of money on political campaigns?
It's more than that. It's Citizens United, but it's also about the way in which wealthy and powerful interests control Congress. The real challenge in this country is how do we make sure that corporations aren't the only ones writing the laws the way they are right now, and that real people, the people that elect representatives, actually get a say in their government.
I didn't see the corporations winning exactly when they backed Romney or Hillary in the last election or Jeb Bush this election. All this money and spending on ads doesn't seem to buy the country.
There are going to be times that they win and they lose, but at the end of, in terms of elections, but at the end of the day, when you're helping write the laws, when you're helping determine what goes on in Washington, it's hard for little people to win.
The unions and big government, that's not influential. They aren't writing the laws and manipulating the rules to suit them?
Here's the big difference between corporations and unions. Unions are a collection of working people coming together to themselves enact change. And they don't have a profit motive. But there's a distinct profit motive for corporations that unions just don't have.
They're not looking,
when you're fighting to make sure that you have a safe workplace. Listen, if we want to have reform of compensation across, corporations and unions, let's do it. Let's make sure that nobody is making an unfair, undue profit off of everyone else's work. And I think that's what Bernie Sanders is trying to bring to this presidential campaign.
You want to fix the big wealth disparity, and there is one. And socialism professes to do that. But how'd that work in in the Soviet Union or Cuba or now in Venezuela? How come it never works? How come it leaves everybody poor?
There's a lot of countries, you know, Nordic countries that have the kind of democratic socialist worldview that works today and is working
Like
quite
what?
well for working people.
When you say Nordic countries, what do you mean?
I'm talking Sweden, Norway. I think it would be a great place to be a middle-class person, and I want to build a country that in the United States that it's a great place to be a middle-class working person.
In Europe, youth unemployment is 20%, double what it is in America. What have they invented in Norway or Denmark? I mean, since Sweden came up with Nokia or Volvo before that, what innovation has come out of Europe? This is a stagnant place. It was rich. Socialism has made them complacent and poor.
I don't think we have to have this kind of false choice between innovation and a country that works for working people. If we had some sort of system where we can ensure that government and business works for working people, it's going to look different than it looks like in the rest of the world. But, you know, creating this kind of false choice isn't helpful when we know that the system we have right now isn't working for most people, except those at the very tippy top. And
I think it's a real
we've
choice,
got to
and
have
your
real
system
systemic
is
change.
worse. But let's go to social media. I asked my social media followers for their thoughts on socialism. On Facebook, Martin Dean posted, "Capitalism accomplishes all the goals socialism tries to achieve and does it without theft or use of force." On Google+, Jason Hum added, "Capitalism is about choice. Socialism is about force." Now, that's true. Government is force. You may hate these big companies, but you don't have to buy their stuff. You have a choice.
The reason why I would love to have a single-payer healthcare system is that if something goes wrong in that healthcare system, if I don't get access to the care I need to survive, I can actually go after the politicians that are enacting that policy. I can actually vote them out of office. I don't have that sort of choice when it comes to taking down a health insurance industry that actively colludes with one another to, prior to Obamacare, prevent me from even getting access to health care.
Government, you have one vote. In Vermont, your vote won't even count in the presidential election because we know they'll vote Democratic. Among private health insurance companies, you have a choice. If you don't like your company, you can go to another company. You can vote with your dollars.
Well, you can vote with your dollars if they'll take your money when you want to buy health insurance. That was the big problem that we had prior to Obamacare, and so many of these people that are talking about eliminating Obamacare for some sort of free market system seem to forget that the real challenge many people had was health insurance companies wouldn't even cover them, that they were cherry-picking the healthy people versus the sick people.
Well, that's what insurance is.
If we could all work together.
It tries to make a profit, and the really sick people may need to be taken care of by government. But it's still competition and better than socialism. We're out of time, Neil, but thank you for arguing your point. Lots of Americans, especially young people, agree with him. There's real excitement at Bernie Sanders rallies. People chant, "Feel the burn."
His supporters that go to see him are totally down with democratic socialism.
We're going to explain what democratic socialism is. And what democratic socialism is about is saying that it is immoral and wrong that the top 1/10 of 1% in this country own almost 90%.
And I do think a lot of Americans feel it's immoral that a tiny number of people control 90% of America's wealth. Some people are so rich, while others struggle to pay for things like health care. And that's why Democrats say government ought to step in and redistribute. If that's socialism, what's wrong with that? Well, let's ask economist Ivan Pangrasek. What's wrong with that? It's unfair.
Well, it doesn't work. We have a great deal of historical evidence that it has never worked. It will never work. It's a system that is not fitting for human beings as we truly are. But we aspire to that.
You grew up under socialism in Yugoslavia.
That's correct.
You were 14 years old.
And I got to observe quite a bit of it. I learned a lot about it from my father, who was a public auditor for the state of Croatia. and he saw the rot from within. He was able to observe that the country was falling apart because he was checking the books of all of these government-controlled, government-owned businesses. And he started trying to get us out of Yugoslavia already in the 1970s. Did not succeed until 1984. But I had a chance, even though I was young, to observe how socialism does not work in person.
Well, you're talking about communism. Today's democratic socialists say, we're not talking about that. We just want Denmark.
There is a great deal of rhetorical flourishing going on here. Denmark is not what Bernie and his followers say it is. In fact, the Prime Minister of Denmark, Lars Rasmussen, objected to Denmark being referred to as a democratically socialist country just back in November. He was quite upset about it. He pointed out that, in fact, Denmark has a very strong market economy. And if you start looking at what Denmark has been doing, that is indeed true. In some ways,
they have less regulation than we have, fewer labor rules. It's easier to hire and fire.
All correct. And in fact, they are ranked extremely close to the United States in terms of the index of economic freedom.
You say income redistribution never works. And you can talk about Yugoslavia, where it certainly kept everybody poor, and Venezuela more recently. But they say, you know, in Denmark and Europe, the people are closer together. It's a nicer society, better for everybody.
I suspect that most people talking about Denmark have not been to Denmark, and they really are not speaking the truth. The fact is that in Denmark, we have still a great deal of income inequality. For example, 10% of the people control 80% of the wealth, even in Denmark. And in addition,
the way things work in market economy.
There is no way to avoid it if you're going to have a market economy. What they do is engage in a great deal of income redistribution. Taxes are very high. If Bernie actually wants the U.S. to be more like Denmark, what should actually happen is that taxes would go up on most Americans, most middle-class people, most even poor people, and go up considerably. But you know, here's just one.
Yvonne, we're out of time. Thank you. Next, how soon, because people don't have a clue, will America go broke? Because it's not just Sanders and the Democrats who promise impossible spending. Republicans want to spend more, too.
We need to increase our military spending.
It needs more money, though.
I would tell you that we're not spending enough right now.
America isn't truly socialist yet. Under socialism, government owns everything. Our government doesn't. It only owns about half. Yes, government's now so big it controls about half the economy. And the government-controlled part keeps getting bigger. We are on the road to bankruptcy. So what do the Democratic candidates say about that?
I would like to see Planned Parenthood even get more funding.
We should expand funding.
They all want to spend more on everything. This would be bad and socialist enough if government had the money, but it doesn't. To fund its promises, it just goes into debt. This month we reached $19 trillion of debt, $16,000 for each and every one of you in America. You ready to pay your share? I didn't think so. Despite this crisis, this election season, we've heard almost nothing from the candidates about our dangerous debt. The last Fox debate, only one brought it up, and that was Rand Paul, and he isn't running anymore. Doesn't anybody care about the debt and America going broke? I care, and so does this woman.
My name is Romina Bacci. I'm the Grover Herman Research Fellow in Federal Budgetary Affairs and Deputy Director at the Roe Institute in the Heritage Foundation.
She's a geeky budget analyst for the Heritage Foundation, and she spends her days obsessing about our debt and sometimes testifying to Congress about it. Romina Bacci joins us now. Nobody cares.
I think people do care, but they don't understand the root source of the problem. One thing we have to understand is $19 trillion in debt now means it's larger than the size of our entire economy. That drags down growth. We should care about economic opportunity.
But people don't get how it drags down growth. Interest rates are low. Everybody said this is going to be a disaster when the debt was much less.
Well, it's kind of like you're on the Titanic. You see the iceberg on the radar screen. It's time to make course corrections now, not go straight towards it, because the programs that are driving this growth in spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those changes are very hard to make. But Congress needs to get us on a path to balance in the long run, because deficits will explode to more than $1 trillion by 2022 and growing from there.
Explode because?
Because of higher spending. And in fact, 85% of the growth in the spending is from Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt.
It's my fault. I'm old. I refuse to die. I keep wanting to collect all the stuff my government's promised me. We baby boomers are a big group. That's really going to bankrupt the country.
Unfortunately, that is the truth, and that's why you don't hear much about it on the campaign trail, because it's the population 55 and older that tends to vote most
right.
disproportionately.
So you have people like Paul Krugman. We have this chart. He wrote a column, The Mostly Solved Deficit Problem. And if you look at it, it's been dropping sharply since Obama took office.
You had the stimulus spending, you had the TARP bailouts, and you had tax revenue dropping.
Of course they can say, well, it's less now.
But well, spending is going up. That's the real problem. The only reason we have seen an improvement in the deficit is, well, Congress has cut some spending on the military, on domestic programs, but very little. Most of it is because of tax increases.
And it hasn't blown up, partly because interest rates are low. But what happens if interest rates went back up to a more normal historical 5%?
We'll be spending more on interest on the debt before the end of the decade than we'll be spending on the military or other federal national priorities. And that's really troubling, because every dollar that goes to interest on the debt is a dollar that's not available for other federal priorities. And how are we going to pay for that?
Even the Republicans want to spend more.
We need to increase our military spending.
It needs more money, though.
I would tell you that we're not spending enough right now.
The Republicans want to increase military spending. The Democrats want to increase spending on everything.
Universal health care coverage for every single man, woman, and child.
Public colleges and universities tuition free.
They get this thunderous applause. People are excited by more spending. They're not excited by what you're talking about.
That's exactly the problem. That's how you got massive unfunded liabilities and promises to seniors and baby boomers that simply we can no longer afford. That's why we need to make change now. And the next president will have to lead on this issue. If we don't cut spending at all, we just try to make up for all these unfunded liabilities with tax increases, we would have to raise taxes on everyone by doubling their taxes, because like I said, there just isn't enough money to get from the rich. So you're raising taxes on low-income workers, you're raising taxes on the middle class. That's what it's going to take if we don't cut spending.
Thank you for your bad news, Romina. Next, young people being brainwashed into supporting socialism.
I had a professor freshman year who introduced himself as the most raging liberal you'll ever meet.
So what can a student say when people bring up socialist myths, like that professor maybe says Jesus was a socialist and capitalism caused the Great Depression? My next guest will tell you what to say.
Most college campuses in America are liberal, full of left-wing professors and dopey kids spouting left-wing slogans.
Often I think O'Reilly's just a cranky old codger complaining about young people, but he has a point when he says that about colleges. Often it seems as if they're promoting socialism. A government report found at top universities 99% of college professors who donated to politicians gave to Democrats. 99%. Jesse Waters asked vacationing college students about leftist professors.
I had a professor freshman year who introduced himself as the most raging liberal you'll ever meet. If you don't like it, then he doesn't care. He tells you to get out.
Do you ever try to change your essay or your answers according to his political bias?
Oh, definitely.
It's not a good thing. How can you get a well-rounded education if your teachers all think one way, and the wrong way in this case? Few students have the guts to stand up to their professors and say, "Excuse me, professor, you're pushing socialist myths." But they should, and this book should help them do that. It's written by Larry Reed. He's president of the Foundation for Economic Education. So, first, what is the Foundation for Economic Education?
FEE, the foundation, is the oldest free market think tank in the United States, and our focus is on high school and college students, giving them the facts and the figures and the arguments they need to stand up for individual liberty and small government and private property and personal character.
So your book has 52 chapters, each one addressing a particular myth. Let's start with some of the big ones. The Great Depression was caused by capitalism.
But just the opposite is the case. I mean, the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rates in 1929 and choke off money growth. The economy slumped. It was the price we paid for the previous bubble that it caused. And then on top of that, for the next dozen years, you had one crazy policy of government after another. Under Herbert Hoover, we had sky-high tariffs. He doubled the income tax, and FDR came along later and made it only worse.
We had the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which people said, let's punish the bad guys. They're taking our money. They sound like Donald Trump sounds today.
But you cannot close the door to imports without closing the door to exports. If foreigners can't sell here because our tariffs are too high, they can't buy here. And foreign governments retaliated and raised their tariffs against American goods. So Smoot-Hawley took a bad situation, a recession, and made it a depression.
America had had recessions before, and we quickly recovered.
That's right.
This time, Hoover and Roosevelt took steps to fix the Depression, and it got much worse and lasted 5 times as long.
That's right. Smoot-Hawley is one of the reasons for that in 1930. 2 years later, we had the Revenue Act passed, which doubled the income tax. It raised the top rate by more than a doubling. And then when Franklin Roosevelt came into office, his New Deal interventions added to the problem. He paid farmers not to grow. He destroyed crops and cattle. He raised taxes. By the end of his first term, Franklin Roosevelt had doubled spending. And in the midst of it all, you had Roosevelt constantly attacking people of enterprise, calling them economic royalists,
yet on
proposing higher
colleges,
taxes.
everybody believes that FDR saved us and the capitalists were the problem. This is why government must intervene.
It's just so false. I mean, the Depression was still with us on the eve of World War II. We really didn't get a recovery until after World War II.
Next myth, profit is evil.
Yeah.
It's those rich people taken from us.
Profit is a measure of success. Profit is the fertilizer, you might say, that kind of quickens the imagination of men and women in the free marketplace.
And the thing that's given America the prosperity we do have now, despite our problems.
Well, yeah, a depression is an economy without profit.
Couple more myths. Jesus was a socialist.
Yeah, I hear this all the time. Jesus himself was approached, and this is recorded in the book of Luke, by a man who wanted him to redistribute wealth. He said, "Master, speak to my brother, that he divideth the inheritance with me." And Christ's reply was, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" I mean, this is the Son of God who says, you know, don't ask me to redistribute wealth. Jesus came to uphold the law. The Ten Commandments are pivotal in that regard. And the 10 Commandments include 2 that say, thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not covet. That's where they end. There's a period. Thou shalt not steal doesn't go on to say, unless you can find a politician to do it for you, or unless the other guy has more than you do, or unless you're convinced you can spend it better than the guy who earned it.
Thank you, Larry Reed. Well, he and I, and probably you, are horrified by the damage done by socialism. My next guest says, you guys, you're out of touch. You don't realize socialism is not a dirty word anymore, but capitalism is. That's next.
You see, folks, this is how socialism starts. Government causes a problem, and then government steps in to solve the problem.
Yes, exactly. When Carly Fiorina said that, I cheered. Finally, a politician pointing out that big government promising to fix things is like socialism. It brings about the same failures. Government proposes solutions to problems government created in the first place. But apparently, I'm not normal. Carly Fiorina didn't generate much excitement on the campaign trail, and many Americans today are quite comfortable with the idea of living under socialism. 43% of likely Democratic voters in the Iowa caucuses said they'd use the word socialist to describe themselves. Shoot me. Now, while this surprises me, pollster Frank Luntz says that's only because I'm clueless about the way people hear the word socialist today. Luntz joins us now from New Hampshire. I'm just out of touch?
A little bit out of touch, but it's not your fault, John. I blame the business community, who has never bothered to actually educate people in the failures of our public system, that capitalism actually works, that the free market system is the reason why we have so many good things spread across the entire country and most Americans, that the fact is that no one's ever bothered to defend free markets.
We have the Pew poll. People age 18 to 29 ask, which do you prefer? 49% picked socialism over capitalism, which got 46%. The good news was as they got over 30, the numbers went down. But these young people are going to be in charge soon.
If you do not explain and do not educate and do not inform, then we have no one to blame but ourselves when the language digresses and bad ideas become good words.
Frank Luntz had a focus group watch the first Democratic debate and turn dials to show what they liked. Watch what happens when the socialist candidate was asked this.
You don't consider yourself a capitalist, though?
Do I consider myself part of the casino capitalist process by which so few have so much and so many have so little, by which Wall Street, greed and recklessness wreck this economy? No, I don't. I believe in a society where all people do well, not just a handful of billionaires.
Let me just be clear. Is there anybody else on the stage who's not a capitalist?
I was relieved that the other candidates didn't rush to raise their hands. They did go on to criticize capitalism, but they weren't eager to call themselves socialists. What bothered me about Frank's focus group is that they liked Bernie Sanders trashing capitalism, and afterward Frank asked them about that.
How many of you walked in here supporting Hillary Clinton? Raise your hands. Raise them high. How many of you are still supporting Hillary Clinton? So who won tonight's debate?
Hillary.
But aren't you nervous,
difference.
those of you who switched, to support a socialist?
No, he's actually for social democracy, is what he's actually for.
Equal opportunity.
Frank, that's what people think socialism is? Equality? Equal opportunity?
Of those people there, almost all of them felt that socialism is compassionate, that socialism is kind, that it's caring. I'm going to tell you something, and I hate to admit this. If you're a young person and you tell someone of the opposite sex that you're a socialist, you're much more likely to get some action at the end of the evening. Why? Because being a socialist in 2016 among college kids is really cool. And that ought to frighten you, because if it's cool today, it's going to change American politics tomorrow.
Fortunately, some political commentators still think socialism has a bad stigma, but they want to fix that. Here's Larry O'Donnell.
We need to take the political sting out of the word socialist. When silly old John McCain began calling Barack Obama a socialist, everyone, not just me, should have said, so are you.
We're socialists because we get Social Security and we use parks and libraries. That's the argument. And it's working.
Yes, it is working. And I know, John, that you're hostile to this. And you and I have had conversations off camera where the work that I do concerns you. But understand this. If you're not attempting to define the words, then Lawrence O'Donnell will be successful. So many people are focused on 2016. I'm looking far beyond. If the American people give up on the free market system, if the American people believe that economic freedom isn't the preferred system of economics, that we are done as a country, we are done as a people, and 100 years from now they will look back and say it was because we gave into socialism that America in the end lost its way.
And got much poorer. One final point, Frank. Last week on my show, my guest, Paul Zak, said he has a measuring system that's better than yours. He measures physiological responses while you mostly just ask questions, and some of the people lie or say things just to seem impressive. Maybe your methods are out of date?
You know, it's an interesting challenge. The technology is moving very quickly, but we've done pretty well at predicting which presidential candidates are emerging out of the earliest elections. And thanks to that instant response technology, those lines, we are able to measure what people actually think and how they actually feel on a second-by-second basis. I'm always looking to improve, as I'm sure you are. We always want higher, better systems and higher ratings. That's our mission, and hopefully we'll deliver.
Thank you, Frank Luntz.
Thank you.
next, some good news. In places that already tried socialism, some young people, like this woman, who've seen the bad things socialism has done, are drawing big crowds talking about how to get rid of socialism.
The universal health care for every man, woman, and child.
What's up with America's young people? Weirdly, Bernie Sanders' big crowds are not made up of people his age. Maybe they've gotten smarter. It's mostly young people. Somehow, socialism, a system that's led to misery all over the world, appeals to young people. Didn't they notice that just south of our border, socialist policies have been tried again and again, and they all led to more poverty? A slight ray of good news is that after experiencing socialist misery, some young people in Latin America have figured out that socialism is not a good thing.
El primer parlamento iberoamericano son bastante grandes. Y la
I don't know
propuesta que yo
exactly
quiero
what this young woman is saying. I don't speak Spanish, but I do know that she has a following. This speech was watched more than 7 million times. The speaker is Gloria Alvarez, and she joins us now. So you're talking to people in Latin America about markets.
Yes. The importance of markets and individual rights, life, liberty, and private property, which are the most violated rights in all of our continent.
And people want to hear this?
Yeah, because they are getting sick of what they have seen, especially Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, the countries that have actually implemented socialism of the 21st century.
Well, you named a few, but I was looking at a list. It's just about all of them have tried it at some point in Latin America.
Yes.
And the most recent socialist failure is Venezuela. This guy and his predecessor said socialism would lift up the poor.
Como sea, ganar como sea.
Instead, socialists took Venezuela from relative poverty to extreme poverty and riots.
More street protests, which have already left 42 people dead in Venezuela. Despite having the world's largest oil reserves, Venezuelans face a near impossible daily task of finding milk, chicken, or toilet paper in stores.
You took some of your own pictures showing empty stores.
Yeah, I went undercover in a supermarket. The lines are infinite, and when you get in, there's nothing to buy, even if you have the card.
The president of Venezuela says the cause of the shortages in the stores is greedy capitalists hoarding food. So here he tells people in the grocery store he has the solution. He'll force all stores to install high-tech fingerprint scanners and limit the amount any one person can buy.
Yeah, this is already being implemented. Actually, there's military forces outside the supermarket checking that you don't take more of what you are allowed to take.
So this is socialism. The government creates a problem, shortages, and then they're going to fix it by spending huge amounts on fingerprint scanners.
It's that in Latin America, we still don't understand how economic works. And we have seen Cuba fail, and it should be enough to see Cuba failing. But then you have people who say, yeah, but in Cuba you don't have freedom, but you have kids that go to school for free, no one is dying of hunger, so it's a good system. Even though you have prostitutes that go to bed with someone for a toothpaste or something like that, that doesn't matter, or the fact that they cannot get out. And since we don't know history, because Latin Americans are oblivious to what happened in the Soviet Union, in China, in all these countries.
So are North Americans.
I think so, yeah. With Bernie Sanders, it's like, if you guys elect that guy, it's going to be Chavez for you.
So how did you learn this?
Well, I learned this because in my family, I have a Cuban history. My grandparents and my dad told me about communism. I studied in a libertarian university, Universidad Francisco.
There's one in Latin America, UFM it's called.
Yes, UFM, and it has the von Mises Library, the Hayek Auditorium, the Milton Friedman Auditorium.
Okay.
Very unusual. And of course, the first thing they teach you is Marx and socialism. One of the first books I read was George Orwell, Animal Farm. One thing is what your parents tell you, but another thing is you contrasting those ideas with reality.
You told me you read this thing?
I did, because I worked on radio, I worked on journalism, and in your book I found, like, I don't know, inspiration to continue with these ideas.
Do you get a lot of hostile pushback?
every country I go to, all these trolls that the government has start insulting you in the internet, in Facebook, on Twitter. And before this video came out, I was not known in all Latin America, because the proposal of that speech was, let's dismantle populism using technology. Let's use Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp to say the reality about what's going on. Let's film how the supermarkets are, how people are dying.
You equate populism and socialism.
Yes, because populism is a way of manipulation. It's a psychological manipulation, especially of people who have not a good education and who have immediate needs. And what you do is you satisfy those needs by giving food or giving medicines, as long as there's money. But then when you start nationalizing and expropriating, then you finish with the sources of productivity in your country, and then the money is running out.
Thank you, Gloria Alvarez. I wish you luck convincing them. Next, since there are socialists and there are capitalists, which one is he?
I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them, 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them. They are there for me.
Thank you, New Hampshire. And now it's on to Nevada, South Carolina, and beyond.
A socialist won New Hampshire. Apparently some Americans are eager for socialism. I don't think they really understand what it is. Look at Occupy Wall Street, that hotbed for socialists. They instinctively saw something was unfair in America. And they have a point. 2 presidents gave your tax money to rich bankers. Entrepreneurs took risks, and when they failed, government loaned them money or gave them money or protected them with anti-competitive laws. That's not fair. But the socialists failed to make a distinction between economic entrepreneurs, those who create value for society, versus political entrepreneurs, people who get rich by funding political cronies. Here's one rich guy bragging about doing that.
I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them, 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them. They are there for me.
I bet they are. But that's not right. That's not a level playing field. I agree with Occupy Wall Street. We need to stop those crony capitalists, those crapitalists. But the unfairness isn't capitalism's fault. It's big government's fault. Capitalists are always going to look for special deals. Government shouldn't give it to them. The democratic socialists' biggest complaint these days is income inequality. And it's true in America, the richest of the rich are vastly richer than the poor. And I see why that bothers people. But why is that a national problem? Some people are more clever than others. Some work harder. Under capitalism, those people will do better. And when they get rich, the poor do better too. That's happened in America. Rich people invest capital in ways that helps most everyone. The claim that the rich got rich at the expense of the poor, that they took something from the poor, and so lately the poor got poorer, that's a lie. The poor and middle class got richer too. Socialism would actually make us more equal. It's worked in Russia, China, Cuba. There's less inequality because under socialism, everyone's poor. Well, everyone except the political leaders.
Tyranny overthrown, liberty restored.
Attacking rich people turns out to be a popular way for nasty dictators to grab power. Larry Reed lists examples in his book, Excuse Me, Professor.
The Feast of the Workers, and this is proletarian power.
Stalin persecuted kulaks, farmers who had a little more money than other farmers. He and Lenin called them blood-sucking parasites. Hitler said similar things about Jews. Mao came to power promising income equality. He said the landlord class was guilty of economic exploitation. And today, when the Castro brothers are criticized for killing political opponents or gays or for beating and starving people in labor camps, they reply, "You have no right to criticize us because you live in a country where there are millionaires and beggars." Now, I'm not saying the income inequality socialists like Bernie Sanders will murder people like Castro and Stalin, but it's infuriating that today's democratic socialists vilify capitalism at a time when there is less of this in the world. Because of capitalism. In the past 25 years, says the World Bank, the number of people living in extreme poverty dropped by half. 1 billion people who once lived like that no longer do. This is the biggest success story of the century. 1 billion people are no longer miserably poor, thanks only to the very capitalism that socialists vilify. And the media are so gullible, so clueless. Mainstream network reporters claim, oh, we don't take sides. But listen to this oily question this CBS reporter puts to Bernie Sanders. He wonders, how did socialism get a bad name?
How did we get to the point where socialism was painted with such a dirty brush?
It got to that point because socialism led to starvation, riots, poverty, death all around the world. Wise up, CBS reporters and socialism lovers. Do we really want to put more power in the hands of government this election? No. Let's not continue down this road to socialism. That's our show. See you next week.